Welcome to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we are traipsing through the streets of New York. Well, Sunshine Falls. And we are discussing TikTok's favorite love story, Book Lovers by Emily Henry. But before we dive into today's episode, let me tell you how you can follow the pod. You can subscribe on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch a full video breakdown on YouTube or on Spotify. You can follow the pod on Instagram at Femme Furious Pod. And you can always send me an email. The inbox is open. I welcome your thoughts, feelings, and opinions. And that is over at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. All right, let's jump into our chic peek for book lovers. This is your blanket spoiler warning. We are talking about everything from this book, Book Lovers. So if you haven't read it, go read it and then come back and listen to this episode. Here's the synopsis. Literary agent Nora Stevens loves her bougie life in New York City, but when her pregnant sister Libby insists on taking a vacation, just the two of them, Nora can't say no. That's how she finds herself smack dab in the middle of a very small town, Sunshine Falls, where her latest author's book takes place. Much to her surprise, Charlie Lustra, her semi-professional enemy, is also in town. When Nora receives a manuscript about a book that is being written about her, Charlie steps up to work on the project with her. With the mysterious errands that her sister keeps running and a confrontation of her flaws through fanfiction, will Nora succumb to the charms of a small town and thus the wiles of Charlie Lustra himself? Bookish baddies, here is what you need to know about this book. I would say the genre is more contemporary romance than it is a rom-com, but both would be suitable for this type of book. Judging the cover, Charlie and Nora are sitting atop their suitcases, which is very unrealistic because neither one of them would not unpack their suitcase and 100% would not be living out of one. But they're both reading in their respective ways. They're sitting back to back and they're passing a book back and forth to each other between them. What I love about this book cover and funny story, which we're going to talk about on Friday, is that Emily Henry loves warm colors. She talks about them consistently throughout her books. It's like a motif that she continues to bring up and up. These warm, golden, soft, pink colors that are just scattered throughout the landscape of her books. So when you have a book like this one, Book Lovers, that is toned blue, it stands out. And this book does stand out, that it's different than her other books in some capacity or another. Blue is the color of Nadine Winter's Frosty Frosty Heart, and seeing Nora and Charlie swapping the book between them is a delightful nod to the fact that they're doing this thing together. They're working on this book about Nadine together. Tropes and microtropes. It is a small town romance. A like attracts like, or rather, grumpy. It's not a grumpy sunshine. It's grumpy. It's an enemies, I guess, to lovers, and a workplace romance. Ish. Who's who? Nora Stevens is a literary agent, older sister, and spiraling over having her client write a fictional book about her. Charlie Lustra, editor, nemesis, older son, small town boy with big city energy. Libby, Nora's younger sister, pregnant, mama of two. Dusty, Nora and Charlie's client, who is currently slandering Nora via her most recent book. The book does include a cat, so this is very on brand for me personally, but I actually hate Dusty, and I think that she did Nora fucking dirty in her book. Okay, let's jump into this week's Femme Frame, where we will dive into key feminist themes, herstory, cultural context, and more. There are a lot of feminist threads in this book. So many, in fact, that it's kind of ironic that on a reread, I didn't like this as much as I did the first time around. But what stuck with me in this reread is this idea of a reverse hallmark. Bear with me, because my TED Talk is loading. You might be thinking, Julia, you're obsessed with pop culture. You swoon for a good romance. And you are a full-blown Christmas girly. I know you don't know this yet, but just trust. So, wouldn't that naturally lead me to the conclusion that you love a Hallmark movie? And to that I say, this is one of those times where 2 + 2 = 5. Because I don't. I don't love Hallmark movies. And here's why. Most Hallmark movies follow the same basic formula, which Nora even jokes about in the beginning of this book, that an ambitious, whip-smart, career-driven woman from the city gives it all up to move to a small town for a man. And she ends up saving his dream, his business, or, God help me, his Christmas tree farm. Now, I grew up just outside of New York City, and I'm going to tell you right now, this idea has never made sense to me. I once moved to Massachusetts for a bit. I'm recording in Massachusetts right now, and I will say this is not a small town. This is a very touristy area that I live in, and I nearly lost it one winter when it snowed so bad that the local coffee store did not open for 3 days in a row. When you live in New York City, things like that don't happen. When you live in New York, close to proximity to the city, things like that don't happen. I don't think I've ever had a snow day where I lived growing up that didn't result in me being able to get whatever I wanted or needed. So when you move to a small town and things that are consistently accessible to you are no longer accessible to you, I don't care how charming it is, it's frustrating when that is the lifestyle that you're used to. And this is what people from cities are used to. It doesn't matter that you need a break. It doesn't make sense. I get the appeal of slow living. I really do. But slow doesn't mean small. They're two completely different things. And small doesn't have to mean self-erasure, which is what happens in a Hallmark movie. A lot of urban people crave slowness. That's not unusual. That's not uncommon. That's not wild to think about or conceptualize. But that's not the same thing as wanting to abandon access to food, to culture, to diversity, to modernity, just to run somebody else's artisanal cider mill. Here's where it gets even deeper with Hallmark. The stories aren't just cozy. They're ideological. There's a deeper rooted issue with these concepts that is connected to Christian nationalism. And let us not forget that Hallmark started as a Christian network. The conservative rhetoric that is being woven throughout these Hallmark movies unsettles me. These movies often reinforce the idea that education and ambition are nice, but ultimately disposable. That your years of schooling, your years of effort, your years of expertise are just a prequel to the scenes of your real life, which is supporting your man's dream. The women at the beginning of these movies are often journalists or academics or lawyers or doctors, meaning they've gone through a ton of education and they have high-powered careers. And yet, they're willing to give that all up for something smaller. And this doesn't strike the right chord with me. I don't think people who go through that much training, studying, academia are so moldable that they can just leave that all behind and fit into something else. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to stay in these careers either. People who want to step out of these careers, that's totally fine. You don't need to stick with something just because you've done a ton of schooling. We just watched that happen last book in Happy Place, right? With Harriet. You don't need to stay in a career just because you've had a ton of education or your life trajectory has been taking you in one way. So that's not to say that if you have all of this education that you have to stick in this career, but that education is almost nearly being told in a very subtle way that it's insignificant. Why go and get all of that education when you're just going to end up in a small town doing the small town thing anyway? Do you see what I mean? Do you see how that could be problematic? And here's what's even more annoying is that despite the fact that that is the message that is often coming through in these Hallmark movies, it is the women with these big careers and their big city skills and their education that they're able to be the one to save the small town business. And that their takeaway then is how useful this thing, this education, this hard work, their skills are in relation to him and his business. And again, I'm not saying that women should never leave their high-powered careers if it's unsatisfying for them. That's not the point of this podcast. That's not the point of the message that I'm trying to bring across. If you're unhappy in a high-powered career, fucking go. You don't need to do that. But this fantasy, this Hallmarkified fantasy that you're going to give it up to live somebody else's purpose? No. No, thank you. No, sir. That's not realistic. and it's not an empowering message, and it's not something that I think women who have a ton of this education should be ingesting. Here's another thing that really annoys me about Hallmark. The movies almost never include LGBTQ storylines. They're not diverse at all. There are very few people of color, and if there are people of color, they're often side characters, or they are tokenized, or the concept of culture never seems to be an influence over the scope of the relationship. That lack of representation isn't just lazy, it's intentional. It's displaying that romance looks a very specific way. That way that it needs to look is predominantly with straight white people. Do you know how many time travel romances exist within the Hallmark universe? To them, it is more realistic that you would fall in love with a British lord who is haunting your inn at a Christmas vacation than it is for you to fall in love with a woman or a person of color. The towns are also always warm and full of cheer and full of community, which, sure, it's cute in theory, but in reality, especially having lived some of that myself, it can feel very, very isolating, especially if you're used to stimulation and diversity and the options that a city life has to offer. Again, does that mean that city people always stay in cities? No. But do I think that city people who move away tend to conglomerate together? Yes. It's why a lot of New Yorkers go down to Florida or to North Carolina. There are other New Yorkers or other people who understand the same vibe that you do. And so your small town becomes built with the community that understands the hustle, the bustle, the stimulation, the diversity, all of the stuff that you're used to brought into another space. Does everyone follow that trend? No. But is it pretty common? I think so. Do small town magics exist? Probably. Have I, a well-traveled woman, ever been to one? No, ma'am. Now here's something where Hallmark and I do agree. Love and connection matter. Here's where we disagree. That it needs to be at the expense of your identity. We need more stories where women get to have it all, but in a way that makes room for complexity and ambition and softness and slowness. It doesn't have to be that it's your career versus a marriage or a love life. You can have both. You deserve both. And you shouldn't have to erase yourself to get there. And this is what I love most about Nora, and this is what I love most about this story. She endeavors to want more throughout the book, not less. She lets herself want more in her career. She lets herself want more with Charlie. She doesn't stay in the small town at the end of the book because she would be dissatisfied with one restaurant that has an inedible salad on the menu. And she even says it. I could probably be happy here with Libby, but it would be like wearing somebody else's jeans. They just wouldn't fit right. She doesn't want kids. She is somebody Nora doesn't want the small town life. She doesn't want to settle down and be rooted and get married and have kids. Maybe she wants to get married. Maybe she wants the deeper commitment, but she doesn't necessarily attach to this family life the same way that we would see perhaps in a Hallmark movie. She is someone who doesn't give up her life for a man, even though she loves him, even though it's clear that she loves Charlie. And what's even better is that Charlie doesn't expect her to. She goes back to New York at the end of this book. She remains true to herself, and she doesn't have to compromise. It's the best part of the book, and it's the most feminist part of the book, in my opinion. All right, babes, are you ready for a quickie? Let's jump into the key themes from this book outside of our femme frame. First and foremost is the elder daughter syndrome. Nora and Charlie are both elder daughters. I don't care that Charlie's a man. He suffers from it either way. Elder daughter syndrome has some really clear symptoms, including caretaking, chronic people-pleasing, fear of stepping away, repressing your emotions to benefit the family, and those are just a few. There's a really good quote early on in this book where Libby tells Nora that she's nothing like their mom, to which Nora's internal dialogue is, "When I was trying to keep us afloat." And I know that's not what Libby's saying, but it still doesn't feel all too different from every breakup that I can remember. A long-winded monologue ending with something along the lines of, "For all I know, you don't even have feelings." Now, of course, this is not true because Nora feels an immense amount throughout this book, especially a pressure to take up the mantle after her mother dies. And this is something she has been dealing with ever since. It's actually why her relationship with Libby becomes so strained, because at some point they grow into sisters, yet Nora still maintains the air of mother as well. And they're playing different roles than that of just sisters, period. Charlie is really no different either, because he takes responsibility for his house when his father becomes less capable of doing so, and truthfully, he doesn't shame his sister for pursuing her dreams instead of coming to help, and he really just continues to swallow his pain and his uncomfortability and push through it and agree to do it, even though he's not good at it. And not that he's not good at taking care of his parents, but he's not good at taking care of the house, right? These are not things that come naturally to him. He's not handy. He lives in Manhattan. He'd rather hire somebody to do it. But he does agree to do it. And the two of them just continue to ping pong back and forth between their elder daughter syndrome until they meet each other and they can really settle into the scope of being seen and understood, not just in their city hearts, but in their really deep-rooted desire to please the family. And that, I think, is where they start to really build a strong bridge towards each other over the course of this book. Another theme that is quite pertinent throughout the course of this book is this idea of being the right woman. This was a strong runner-up for my Femme Frame today, because Nora struggles with this so profoundly throughout the book, and it is so prominent that it makes up about 90% of my highlighted quotes. Nora is a type A queen. She is the woman who handles business. She pays the bills. She shows up early. She triple checks the details. She's stylish. She's successful. She knows how to get a good martini. But here's the thing. In every love story she has ever known, fictional and in real life, she doesn't see herself reflected, and she's not the main character. She's the woman who gets left behind, and she knows it. She's tormented by it. She even says, tropes and cliches have to come from somewhere, right? Women like me have clearly always existed. So it's either a very specific kind of self-sabotage or an ancient curse. Come to think of it, maybe it started with Lilith. Too weird to be a coincidence. This idea of being the right woman hit me so hard throughout this book. It hits so hard in the way that Nora internalizes this role, or this idea that she's too sharp or too ambitious or too much. She feels her value lies in how much she is doing things perfectly, and she consistently points out the double standard that women are pressured to comply with. So at some point she's talking to Charlie and she says, that's the thing about women. There's no good way to be one. You wear your emotions on your sleeve and you're hysterical. Keep them tucked away where your boyfriend doesn't have to tend to them, and you're a heartless bitch. And then comes along Charlie, and he's emotionally constipated, and he uses sarcasm as a defense mechanism. And it's charming because he doesn't want Nora to change. He wants to carry her up the stairs to preserve her fancy heels. He doesn't want to demand that she makes a more practical shoe choice. He meets her right where she is, and not a curated version of her, but the one that is messy, and that is lonely, and that is guarded. What Emily Henry does so brilliantly here, that I've been talking about really the whole time, is this flip of the trope. Nora doesn't move to the small town and discover that she was wrong to have ambition. She doesn't throw away her life in New York for a cottage and a bookshop. She stays true to herself. She keeps her sharp edges. And it's painful to leave Charlie behind at first, but she knows she's making the right choice. And in the end, she still gets the love story. When Charlie shows up to the bookstore and he says, here's how it's going to go. This is what our life is going to be like in New York. This is how we're going to live. This is what we're going to do. And it fits the story of City and two career-oriented individuals, and letting her have all of her ambition and all of her fancy stuff and all of the things that seem impractical, like her bajillion step skincare. And it feels like a really powerful message for anyone who's ever been made to feel like they have to become somebody else in order to be lovable. She doesn't need to edit herself in order to fit into a love story. They write their love story around who the two of them are and what feels good to them. And Nora gets to star in that show in a way that feels authentic to who she truly is. So yeah, Book Lovers isn't just a rom-com, it's a reclamation of a kind. It's about women who are done being the right kind of woman and instead start asking themselves, what if I'm just enough as I am, and letting it be? What if somebody like Charlie Lastra could love me because we are the same, you and I? Last but not least about this book, This book is not my favorite because even though we are flipping the trope, it is still a small town romance. And I'm sorry, internet, I'm sorry, book talk, I'm sorry, bookstagram. I fucking hate a small town romance. It doesn't make sense to me. They always feel unrealistic to me. And I don't know. I just don't like them. It's not my thing. I know the internet loves a small town romance. They're promoted all over the place, including this book, by the way. I would say out of all of Emily Henry's books, this is the one that like everyone has gone gaga for. This and Funny Story, which we're talking about on Friday. What I love about this book, though, what I loved about it the first time around and what I loved about it this time is that there is a love letter to New York in this book. There is a love letter to New York. There is this idea of all of the people that you could see. There is this idea of New York in the summer heat, of crying on the subway, of things that you as a New Yorker, if you've ever lived in New York or if you've ever been to New York, there is something about the city that holds potential and holds promise and holds everybody. You don't judge the person who's crying on the subway. You just understand it. You've been there. And I love this idea of like, you're not a real New Yorker until you let your emotions out in public. I think it's true. We've seen it all. When you live in Manhattan or when you've been to the city enough times, you understand that you see it all and you love it all. And you get to see and understand the most beautiful parts of humanity. And that's why, even though this happens a little bit more in the people we meet on vacation, this idea of Humans of New York, such a profound platform when that was existing, of just connecting us to the diversity and the experience of what happens in this magical, magical city. And so Book Lovers is this love letter to New York in so many ways. And as a city girl myself, as a New Yorker, I loved every sentence in this book that was dedicated to the magic of the best city in the world. All right, let's crack open our burn book where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. Bold and bothered award. Here's the quote. There is, of course, a misconception that straight men universally love tall, thin women. Being such a woman, I can debunk this. Many men are too insecure to date a tall woman. Many of those who aren't are assholes looking for a trophy. It has less to do with attraction than status, which is only effective if the tall person is a model. If you're dating someone taller than you and she's a model, then you must be hot and interesting. If you're dating someone taller than you and she's a literary agent, cue the jokes about her wearing your balls on a silver necklace. The Shiro Award. Charlie's sister staying in Italy. Even though you desperately want Charlie and Nora to be able to be together, which obviously they are by the end of this book, the idea that the sister or the woman in the family doesn't need to be the one that comes home and saves the day and manages the family is something I really appreciate. The fact that she gets to stay in Italy and be with her partner and paint or whatever she's doing over there and not be the one that replaces Charlie so Charlie can go live his dreams, that would be a Hallmark trope. It's just a different one. It's just the one where the sister or the woman in the family takes care of all of the things in the family. And I love that she doesn't have to do that in order for Charlie or for her parents to get the happy ending that they're looking for. The Femme Fatale Award. Here's a quote. The rules are different for women. You have to strike this perfect balance to be taken seriously but not seen as bitchy. It's a constant effort. Speak Your Truth Trophy. Now, bear with me because when I wrote Speak Your Truth Trophy, I wrote that it could be your favorite quote or the best line of the book. And I know that this is a line that probably many people skipped over, but it's one that I haven't stopped thinking about since the first time I read this book. I love this line so much, and I had to put it in here. And that quote is, Charlie, hitting my brain like an Alka-Seltzer tab, dispersing in every direction. I fucking love this quote so much. Like, I would get it tattooed on me if it made sense out in the world other than this book. And the honorary heartthrob. Truthfully, it's when he carries her up the stairs to preserve her heels, okay? I know that the lake scene does in fact exist. And I know that the romp in the bookstore also exists. Those things are hot, those things are great. But when he carries her up the stairs to keep her heels intact, it is just such a show of how much he knows her and loves her and respects her. And that's fucking mind-melting to yours truly. Okay, and that's our episode today. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Femme and Furious. If you like this episode, share it out with your friends, post it on social media, and I will be back on Friday with Funny Story, and then Tuesday we'll be doing a You've Got mailbag. And until then, don't pack up your U-Haul and move to Sunshine Falls. New York City is perfectly fine. Bye for now.